Welcome to the updated Dr. Bernstein podcast. Please check the description for the original sources, and all content is general in nature and should not be considered medical advice. Okay, so get this. A listener wrote in with a question about Dr. Bernstein's claim that nearly all diabetics have psoriasis. They were so blown away by that statement that they asked us to do a deep dive into it.
Wow.
So is Dr. Bernstein onto something, or is this just a case of hyperbole?
Well, it's certainly a bold claim.
It is.
And you have to admit, it piques your curiosity.
Yeah.
Dr. Bernstein, as you know, has been treating diabetes for over 70 years, both in himself and countless patients.
Right.
His perspective comes from decades of hands-on experience, so his observations definitely carry weight.
That's true. He isn't just theorizing here. He's looking for patterns based on what he's seen over his career.
Right.
And here's the kicker. He doesn't just focus on those classic textbook psoriasis symptoms. He's pointed out some pretty unexpected signs that he believes are connected.
Exactly. And this is where it gets super interesting. He talks about rough elbows, which a lot of people might just dismiss as dry skin.
Oh, yeah?
But he suggests there's something more to it in diabetics. Then there are things like longitudinal lines on fingernails, missing luneally, those little half moons at the base of your nails, and even shaggy cuticles.
Okay, hold up. Shaggy cuticles. Now, those I have. I never would have connected that to psoriasis.
Right. And he doesn't stop there. He also mentions an itchy scalp, ears, and nose, and even perianal itching.
Oh, wow.
It's a whole collection of signs that, according to Dr. Bernstein, point towards psoriasis, even when the typical skin patches aren't obvious.
Okay, I'm starting to see why our listener was so intrigued. It's a pretty different way of looking at psoriasis, and definitely unexpected. But let's be honest, those observations alone don't prove anything. We need some hard data, some research to back it up. That's where the PubMed studies come in, right?
Absolutely. And while none of the studies we dug into flat out say that Dr. Bernstein is 100% right about the prevalence of psoriasis in diabetics, they reveal some pretty fascinating connections between the two conditions.
Okay.
For instance, one study published in the Journal of the European Academy of Dermatology and Venereology looked specifically at children and adolescents with type 1 diabetes and found that psoriasis popped up quite frequently in this group.
So that kind of supports Dr. Bernstein's observation that the connection could be there even early in life. We're not just talking about something that develops later on.
Exactly. And then there's a study from Acta Diabetologica that really caught my eye. It focused on children with both type 1 diabetes and psoriasis. What's super interesting is that these kids had higher levels of C-peptide when their diabetes first appeared.
Okay, hold on a second. Back up for a sec. What exactly is C-peptide, and why does it matter in this context?
Great question. C-peptide is basically a byproduct of insulin production. So finding higher levels in these kids suggests a possible link between the two conditions at a really fundamental level. It's like they're somehow intertwined from the get-go.
Yeah, that's a pretty big deal. So we're not just talking about two separate conditions that happen to coexist. There might be a deeper connection, even at a biological level.
Precisely. And there's more. A study in the Journal of Clinical Medicine looked at something called the B7H4 gene. Now, this gene has been linked to both type 1 diabetes and metabolic changes in people with psoriasis.
Hold on, you're saying one gene is implicated in both, so maybe it's not just random chance that these two conditions seem to show up together so often.
Exactly. It really points towards a shared underlying mechanism. Something that connects these two conditions in a way we haven't fully understood yet. It's like those seemingly random signs Dr. Bernstein mentioned. The rough elbows, the nail changes. Maybe they are clues to something bigger.
This is getting really interesting. But before we go too far down this rabbit hole, I think it's important to acknowledge that even with this genetic link correlation, doesn't automatically equal causation. Just because two things are connected doesn't mean one directly causes the other. There could be other factors at play.
You're absolutely right.
Okay.
It's like a complex puzzle, and we're just starting to put the pieces together. Dr. Bernstein's observations, combined with these research findings, give us a whole new way to think about these conditions and how they might be related. But we need more research to figure out the exact nature of this relationship.
Okay, so we've got Dr. Bernstein's years of experience on one side and some intriguing research findings on the other. It's clear that there's a link between psoriasis and diabetes. But the big question is, how strong is that link, and what does it really mean?
That's what we're going to explore as we dig deeper into the research. We'll unpack more studies, look at possible shared mechanisms, and consider what this all means for someone who might be dealing with either one or even both of these conditions. What's really fascinating is that the research doesn't just stop at psoriasis and diabetes.
Oh.
A study in Annals of Neurology found a connection between those two A&D multiple sclerosis.
Whoa, 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 really?
Yeah, they all seem to share certain genetic risk factors, particularly those related to the immune system.
Hold on, are you saying there might be a genetic link between 3 autoimmune conditions?
Yeah,
This is getting way more complex than I initially thought.
I know, right? But that's what makes it so intriguing.
Yeah.
The researchers dug deep into the genetics and found a really strong correlation.
Hmm.
They even suggested that psoriasis might actually have a causal effect on multiple sclerosis, independent of type 1 diabetes.
Okay, my mind is officially blown.
Yeah.
But let's bring it back to Dr. Bernstein for a second. Even though he didn't have access to all this fancy genetic research, his hands-on approach seems to align with what the science is suggesting.
You hit the nail on the head. Dr. Bernstein might not use the same scientific jargon,
Right.
but his observations about the high prevalence of psoriasis in diabetics, along with those unique signs he looks for, seem to be pointing in the same direction as the research.
It's like he was way ahead of the curve just by observing his patients and connecting the dots.
Yeah.
But here's where I get a little stuck. If there's such a strong connection between psoriasis and diabetes, why isn't it more widely recognized?
That's a great question, and I think there are a few reasons.
Okay.
First, as
Okay.
we've already mentioned, correlation doesn't equal causation.
Right.
Even though the research suggests a strong link, it doesn't automatically mean that one condition directly causes the other. There could be other factors at play, like shared genetic predispositions or environmental triggers.
Okay, so it's not a simple cause and effect situation. It's more nuanced than that.
Exactly. And to make things even trickier, both psoriasis and diabetes can show up in different ways with varying levels of severity.
Oh, gosh.
That makes it harder to pinpoint clear patterns and connections. It's like trying to find a single thread in a giant, messy ball of yarn.
Huh. That's a perfect analogy.
Right.
So basically, we're still in the early stages of understanding this connection. It's like we've just started to scratch the surface.
Precisely. Plus, research in this area is still relatively new. As scientists conduct more studies, we'll likely gain a much clearer picture of the relationship between these conditions and its implications.
So it's a watch this space kind of situation.
Mm-hmm.
More answers could be coming as the research evolves.
Exactly. And you know what that means? Potentially more effective ways to prevent, diagnose, and treat both psoriasis and diabetes.
Wow.
Now, that would be a game changer.
Talk about a reason to stay tuned. But before we get too carried away with future possibilities, let's take a minute to summarize what we've learned so far. We started with Dr. Bernstein's claim that nearly all diabetics experience psoriasis.
Which, let's be honest, sounded pretty out there at first.
It did, yeah.
But now, in light of the research, it's starting to make a lot more sense.
Right. And then we explored those unique signs Dr. Bernstein uses to identify psoriasis, many of which most people wouldn't even think about.
Like those rough elbows missing lunula, and even itchy ears.
Yeah.
It's amazing how something so seemingly insignificant could actually be a clue.
And those clues seem to add up when we look at the research. We've got studies linking psoriasis to both type 1 A&D, type 2 diabetes, studies highlighting shared genetic risk factors, and even research suggesting a potential link to multiple sclerosis.
It's like all these different pieces of evidence are converging to tell a bigger story. While we haven't definitively proven Dr. Bernstein's 100% claim, it's clear that his observations combined with the scientific research point to a much stronger connection between psoriasis and diabetes than many people realize.
So even if Dr. Bernstein's estimate might be a bit high, he was definitely onto something. But what does this mean for our listener and others who might be dealing with one or both of these conditions?
That's the key question, isn't it? The research doesn't just give us cool facts to ponder. It can also guide us toward better health decisions. And while the research is still evolving, there are some potential takeaways that might be really valuable.
Okay, I'm all ears. Give me the good stuff. What can people actually do with this knowledge?
Well, for starters, if you happen to have psoriasis, it might be a good idea to be extra vigilant about your blood sugar levels. Talk to your doctor about getting tested for diabetes, even if you don't have any obvious symptoms.
That makes a lot of sense. Early detection is key for managing both conditions effectively. It's like, why wait for things to get worse if you can catch them early on?
Exactly. And on the flip side, if you're already dealing with diabetes, pay close attention to your skin. Are you experiencing any of those signs Dr. Bernstein mentioned?
Like,
Rough elbows,
yeah.
itchy scalp changes in your nails?
Right.
It might be worth bringing those up with your dermatologist.
So basically we're saying that awareness is key. Noticing those subtle signs and having open communication with your healthcare providers could make a real difference.
Absolutely. It's about being proactive and advocating for your own health.
Right.
And as research progresses, we might even see new treatment approaches that target the shared underlying mechanisms of these conditions. Imagine that a two-for-one deal.
Yeah.
Cheat one and potentially improve the other.
Wow, that would be incredible. It really highlights how connected everything is in the body. And speaking of connections, remember that study that linked psoriasis to multiple sclerosis? It makes you wonder what other conditions might be tied into this web.
Right. It's like we're just beginning to understand the complex interplay between the immune system, genetics, and various health conditions. Dr. Bernstein, with his decades of observation, might have been tapping into something much bigger than even he realized.
It's pretty mind-blowing. So to our listener who asked about Dr. Bernstein's claim, I hope this deep dive has given you a whole new perspective on psoriasis, diabetes, and the potential connections between them. What initially seemed like a far-fetched idea now has a lot more scientific weight behind it.
And for everyone listening, remember that knowledge is power. The more you understand about these conditions, the better equipped you are to manage your own health. Keep learning, keep asking questions, and don't be afraid to advocate for yourself.
And hey, who knows? Maybe someday you'll be the one making those groundbreaking discoveries that change how we view autoimmune conditions. Until then, keep exploring. And remember that this is just the beginning of the story. Be sure to check out the original sources in the episode description to dive even deeper into this fascinating topic.
Remember to like and subscribe, and thank you for listening.